Hi, I'm Jessica Grant, pediatrician at Manhattan Valley Pediatrics, a private practice on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, mom of two girls, age 5 and 8, and your host for Now What, the podcast aimed at all things parenting. For those of you who have tuned in before, you know I think that parenting, though rewarding, is quite hard. I keep waiting for it to get easier. They're not infants anymore. They're not terrible twos anymore. They're not three-nagers anymore. And though it gets more fun, it has yet to get much easier. To this end, I hope that by bringing on guests to this podcast, we can teach our audience small ways in which to make parenting a little bit easier. Today's podcast is very near and dear to my heart. My good friend, Alana, we'll be talking about her parenting journey in general and her past year in particular. Alana and her family lived overseas for many years, and I think there's some really interesting lessons to explore in that. More impactful, about a year ago, her son had a tragic accident that forced the family to move back to the States. And this part of the story to me is filled with so much hope and fortitude and inspiration that I really want my audience to get to hear. Before I bring Alana on, I just want to give a couple quick words about Alana. To know Alana, to have met her, is to be her friend. She has the biggest heart. She gets to know people in the most personal way you can imagine. People joke that she collects friends. That is true, but I think undermines what she does. She does not just collect them, she knows them and she truly cares about them. I got to know Alana as her pediatrician. It may sound strange to become good friends with your pediatrician. Alana would not find that strange. She would not even know why that was strange. This is what she does. I've been over her house for family dinners. I watched American Idol every week at her house in its heyday. I have been to her children's birthday parties, and I can say that she is not only a wonderful friend, she's an even better mom. So, Alana, welcome. Why don't you pop on up?
Thank you, Jess. That means a lot to me. And I'm the one that was truly blessed to have you not only as our pediatrician, but as a friend.
Thank you. Thank you. So do you want to give a few lines about, your family and just kind of who you are and where you lived overseas, and then I'll kind of get into the meat of living over there?
Sure. So I'm originally a New Yorker, which I'm sure will be shocking once you hear my accent. And then I went to school in DC. I met my husband my senior year of school. And he's 5 years older and he was already working. And then after graduation, I did a nonprofit job for a while, but it wasn't paying back my student loans. I joined a consulting firm and then really wanted to do something around 9/11 to join the government. So I joined the government and was very lucky for the State Department to send me actually back to New York. Was our first tour, which is funny that no one joins the Foreign Service to go back to where they're from, but that's what happens. And at that time, our daughter, Alexandra, was 2, and we weren't really sure if we were going to have other children. And then lo and behold, along came Jake, and that's how I met Jessica. Although Jess was our pediatrician before Jake was born because of Alex. From New York, we went to Bangkok, Thailand. I did a stint in Afghanistan while the family stayed in Thailand. Came back to the States for a bit. My husband went to Pakistan, and then while the kids and I stayed in Virginia, and then we did Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden, and then Vienna, Austria.
Amazing. And what was it like living overseas, raising kids? What were the advantages to living there?
So, I lived in the same house from when I was born to when I went to college. And so it was just a really different experience. But when I got to see how the kids really appreciated different cultures, and we made it a point to travel a lot. So being in Southeast Asia, we were able to take advantage, and we did a 2-week trip to New Zealand and Australia. We'd go for a weekend because I wanted to run a 10K in Laos, or go to see Vietnam, or we did the kids' spring break in Burma. And they just had a really good appreciation of the world outside of America. And we sent them to international schools, so they had friends from all over the world. And I was talking to Jake this morning about this podcast, and I said, what do you think is the best part of having lived overseas, in addition to just the exposure to different cultures? And he said, Mom, it made it so much easier for me to make new friends. Like, I don't worry about starting a new school. And again, I had the same friends from when I was born to when I went to college. So I always thought this might be difficult. And I'm not sure that they loved it, but at the end of the day, they now like they walk into a room and they are not afraid of meeting people. And the world is a lot more interconnected than it was when, I grew up in New York and, a long time ago. So they can stay in touch. And like Jake, is on social media with his friends from all over the world. And he's like, hey, this friend is, in this part of the world tomorrow because they're going on vacation. And I think that helps a lot as opposed to the old days when I was writing like old school snail mail to my pen pal in France or what have you. So I think that has helped a lot from that perspective. But also, I have to say, strangely, and this is not something that I expected, my kids are so close because when we move to a new country, they only have each other for the initial time before school starts. So we try to move in the summer. And then eventually the kids, develop friendships of their own, but they really remain close because it's a very tight family unit for the first initial months. So I think that was one of the greatest advantages that I was not expecting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have a couple of families who have moved overseas, largely to London. I mean, families in my practice, and they come back and see me for their checkups. So I get to see kind of, how they're doing. And I feel like every year they come back more grown up and more confident. And I'm like, what's happening over that pond that's causing that? It's really interesting to watch.
Yeah.
But I think that there has to be something to that experience that makes them bolder and something about it, right?
Yep.
What were their challenges? Did they complain in the beginning? Did they
I
maintain their
think,
friendships here at all? How was that?
yep. So it's a great question. I do think there are some challenges. I think, social media makes it, for me, the challenges I saw with them keeping in touch with their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, cousins, friends, that was hard. But honestly, with, video chats and Facebook and what have you, that mitigated some of those challenges. But, I think Alex will say something, my daughter, who's now 18, will say things like, Mom, you've had friends from when you were 5 and they're still big people in your life. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't change because we stayed together. Like you develop those friendships. And if you put in the effort, then you will have those friendships when you're as old as I am. So I think that was probably a challenge for them to kind of understand when they were younger. Again, we moved to New York. Al was 2, Jake wasn't born yet. We moved to Thailand. She was 6, he was 3. And so that was kind of their first memories were in Bangkok, which felt like the other side of the world at that point, but it really wasn't. And I think even now, Alex is a freshman at university and still talks to some of her friends from Bangkok.
You could tell Alex that even if she had stayed in the city, it's such a transient city that she wouldn't have had the experience you and I had growing up in the suburbs, right?
Yep.
Like where no
Yep.
one moved. People move here too. And I spend a lot of time thinking, is that unfair to my kids that their friends move away a lot, not all of them, but a lot. And I like to hope that as they get older and it's more on them to maintain those friendships, they choose to, right? I mean, but I think that would happen here even to some extent. Do you ever think about, like, had you stayed here, how different it would have been?
Oh, I
Could
think
you
about
make
that a lot.
comparisons?
I do. And it's funny because even in light of Jake's accident, like even before that, I would think about would these kids be like? It is funny because now both kids are in school in the US and they will say things like, Mom, these kids don't understand the world. Like we're trying to explain to them about, the Russia-Ukraine conflict or now what's going on in the Middle East. And these kids don't necessarily understand that there is a world outside of their state, never mind outside of the US. And so I am glad that they have that global view. And I think it also not just teaches them resilience, but teaches them compassion because it's funny now, we'll say things like, well, this kid was having a rough time and they've lived here their whole life. But I explained to them, like, this is how I get through a tough day or what have you. And so, I think there's kind of a mix of that being back in the States, both positive and negative, but they have really learned to embrace it. And hopefully, like Jake's social studies teacher told me that Jake basically is a co-teacher in the class with him because like a lot of the material that they're going through is stuff that Jake just learned on his own. And so it's yeah, I think that it's been an interesting experience, and certainly one, like I always say, when I die, I wish I'd come back as one of my kids. Like they went to the Maldives, just because, and they did shark cage diving in South Africa with my husband. Like, so that was not the experience I had growing up in a middle class family on Long Island, but it is what it is.
How'd they feel about coming back? I mean, obviously, it was under complicated circumstances, which we'll get into, but in general, how did they feel about living in the States again?
Um, I think neither of them wanted it. Before Jake's accident, he was like, "Well, can't you find some war zone to go to so I can go to boarding school and stay in Austria?" Um, and our daughter was looking at schools in London. Really, was kind of her. That was what she wanted to do. However, I think now that they're back, and I do think because of Jake's accident, she's very happy she made the choice that she is not in London and is in driving distance if need be. It's a long drive, but we could do it. Jake is less than thrilled about being in a suburban Atlanta school, but he loves the school and he has made good friends, thankfully, even though he's really been in school only 2 months. But again, it's the same type of thing. It's basically like, Mom, I can't talk to these kids about, the conflict in Ukraine, whereas one of his best friends from Austria is a Ukrainian friend. So I think that's a little bit of a difficulty for them. However, they are enjoying the ability to share their insights and kind of educate these suburban kids as to what life is like outside of the US.
I'm just thinking as we're talking about, one of my bigger anxieties as my kids grow up is their relationship with social media. I think it's really problematic as a pediatrician. I think it sets up a lot of, we know that, early cell phone use and social media sets up more anxiety and more depression. And I'm just wondering if you haven't lived here, but if you have any opinion of living overseas. On the one hand, they did have to have some social media. It's how they assume they stayed in contact with some
Yep.
people here.
Yep.
On the other hand, I don't know if social media is as used in some of the places you lived in on like a daily basis that people are on, I don't know, on their Instagram and their Facebook every day. And so what is your kind of relationship with your kids and social media?
I mean, I think teenagers are teenagers no matter where they live, right? And I think that because social media is so global, I do think the same struggles we have as parents in monitoring social media usage and just, phone and Xbox and Netflix, all of like kind of just electronics, we
Mhm,
say,
mhm.
right? I do think that's a struggle. I think overseas, they probably do the same amount. Um, and a lot of it is the kids are going to international schools, right? So they're kids from other places for the most part. They're not local kids. And so I think there is the same amount of use. I We didn't get Jake a phone until I think we moved to Sweden. So even when we were back in the States, he had one of those watches where he could call like 5 set numbers. And when we went to Sweden, we got him the phone. And yeah, do I think he's on it too much? Absolutely. Just like every parent, right? But a lot of times, like in the morning now, when I'm helping him get ready, he'll tell me, Mom, did you see this article on BBC? And so again, I do think it needs to be monitored in terms of the time of usage, but I also trust my kids that they come to me when they see something that's troubling or when they see something they want to discuss.
Mhm.
So I agree, it's a necessary evil to some extent, especially as we want them to connect with family and friends from around the world. But like Jake is not on Instagram. He's not on most things. He is on Snapchat and he'll say, Mom, I want to text my friends. That's the only platform they use. So I think our daughter who's in university she's on a little bit more. But I agree with you. I think you have to have an honest discussion with your children and be like, what are you reading? What are you feeling? And because we were such a tight family unit, I think that discussion came more easily for us because we're like, hey, we're in this random country. We need to talk about what you're going through or how's school going or their friends that have problems. We should talk about this.
And obviously they were in an international school where I assume they largely were educated in English.
Right.
But what was their approach or your family's approach to the language changes with all these moves? Did they work on picking up any local language? Did they kind of just say, I'm not going to hear it at all?
Well, that's a great question. So in Thailand, we learned taxi Thai is what we call it. So it's enough to get by. I did learn early that if you are able to negotiate in Thai, that prices just dropped half
Mhm.
price, like no matter where you were. So I got really good with numbers in Thai.
You're such a New Yorker. You're like, I'm going to learn this language in order to negotiate with a
Harder.
taxi driver.
Yeah,
Or
yep, exactly. I'm not gonna lie, I did not attempt to learn Swedish. It was so hard. And Jake did okay with Swedish. Alex, I don't think bothered. But I speak French, and I lived in France, and so we both kids took French at first, but then when we moved to Vienna, Jake really embraced German, like really, like he has the accent. I don't even know how he makes half of these sounds. But he continued German once we moved back here. And I think he's doing really well in it. And he just really wanted to really dig in. And he loved Vienna anyway. So it was pretty easy.
Mhm.
Um, and Alex has just continued with the French. But yeah, I think the language thing is interesting. Luckily, we were in places where there is a lot of English.
Mhm.
So other countries may be a little bit more difficult to get the locals to speak in
Mhm.
English, but we did not have. I developed enough German that I could get around. But like in Sweden, you didn't even, if you asked somebody a question in Swedish, they'd always respond in English.
Right, right. And if you had a family who called you up and said, we're thinking about moving overseas with our kids,
Mhm.
what would you say to them? Would you tell them to do it?
I would absolutely tell them do it without hesitation.
Any tricks that you would give them to make the transition easier or to convince kids? I feel like kids are oftentimes, especially as they get older, the hold up. They're
Mhm.
used to living here. I have my friend, whatever. Any tricks or advice?
Yeah, I would have the kids do their own research, actually.
Mhm.
That's what we did, when we found out we were going to Sweden, is we had the kids sit down and do Google searches and say, "Okay, what are the top 10 things that you find interesting about this country? What is your top exciting thing that you wanna go see once we land?" And I think getting them involved in the planning process, definitely helps. Having them do virtual tours of the school that you're planning to send them to
Mhm.
also really helps a lot. Um, and I think that just having a positive attitude and being like, hey, we're going to get to do really cool adventures that a lot of your American peers are not going to ever get to do. And we're going to do it as a family. I think really kind of kept my kids very excited about it.
And you traveled a ton, I know, while you like you mentioned, while you were over there. It's just so much easier to hop around Europe or, hop around Asia, obviously. Any tips for just travel in general with kids? Anything that you did you have a pre-packed bag that you just went everywhere? Like, how did you, finesse that?
So luckily, our kids weren't infants
Mhm.
anymore by the time we went to Thailand. Although Jake still was just on the end of being fully potty trained, so that was kind of funny. But I think again, if you like, we said to Jake probably about a year ago, we have a year, well, it was a year and a half or whatever time. We have a year left. What are the places you really want to hit in Europe during our time here?
Mhm.
And we let the kids decide. I mean,
Mhm.
with some extent, I mean, with some moderation, but Jake was like, he came up with a list of like 10 cities. And I'm like, okay. So we all would do our own individual research and come together as a family and say, okay, here's the amount of time we have. These are must do's. These are nice to do's. And these are ones that, okay, fine. If 3 of the 4 of us didn't want to do it, then it was coming off the table.
Right.
And I think that getting them involved even at young ages, like we have a lot of friends that are in Austria who have kids that are young and just be like, oh, okay, let's go to France because in France they have amazing food or they have, like you want to see the Eiffel Tower. Here's a picture of it now. Like, look how cool it's going to be. You're going to see it in person. And I think that kind of raises the excitement. And they're always going to have trepidation about being a new kid, or what's it going to be like? Do I have to wear uniforms? Can I wear my own clothes? What's the food going to be like at the school? And those are all things that are manageable if you communicate early and often and relay the information that
Mhm.
they need to feel comfortable.
Did they eat overseas? Like my kids, they went to Spain and I think we ate like croquetas for every meal for a week straight. My kids have a very limited diet. Do you think your kids, did they eat a lot? Did it
They
expand
do.
their
They
diet with travel? They just
are
eat everything?
very adventurous eaters. And again, I think that started because they were so young in Thailand. I mean, living in New York, I we just ate normal takeout. Like, I mean, we introduced them to Indian food or Asian food or what have you. But living in Thailand definitely expanded that. And the big joke in our family is the only time in the 3 years we lived in Asia that Alex and I got food poisoning and badly was when we ordered Italian food in Cambodia. So, and so that was the only time. And we ate street food a lot. I have to tell you, like the kids loved Sundays for us as a family when we lived in Thailand. The four of us would go to a reputable massage, like spa place. And then on the walk home, we would get street food and it would be $30 for everything, like an hour massage for four people and street food. And that was kind of, if we were in town, that was our Sunday routine.
So I have bad news for you. When you come up to visit us, you can get like a toe massage for $30. So you need to readjust.
Well, yes, I know this. Even in Atlanta, where we are now, I'm like, oh my gosh, these prices are crazy. And that is one thing my friends warned me about was the sticker shock, because again, we've been overseas for this go round has been 4 years, and the prices of groceries and all of that, and that has been sticker shock.
Yep. How was the adjustment back for them in that regard? I mean, they came back under extraordinary circumstances, so maybe there was not time to really focus on that. But I do know that in general, I've had friends who have lived overseas doing rotations, medical school, those kinds of things, and they come back and it's a hard adjustment. It's a big adjustment in terms of wealth, in terms of access, in terms of a privilege, in a lot of ways that we have, in the States.
So Jake and I came back in February for his recovery. Unfortunately, it was Alex's last couple of months of high school, and we didn't want her to be disrupted any more than normal. So Sean, my husband, and I decided that he and Alex will stay in Vienna, and Jake and I will come to Atlanta. And that was not ideal, of course, but it is what ended up happening. And I ended up living in the hospital with Jake for like 4 months. And when I would go out to get, I don't know, whatever I was getting, and I'd come back, I'm like, Jake, can you believe this? And he's like, is that an Atlanta price or is that a US price? And I'm like, I don't know, man, but this is crazy. And then like when we were interviewing schools for him, or looking at, apartments and all of that, he was pretty shocked. And so meanwhile, Alex and Sean were finishing their tour. They came back, and Alex has this newfound appreciation too, now that she is on her own of, Mom, did you know Starbucks was $6? And I'm like, yeah, I know. So every time you say, hey, Mom, can you get me a Starbucks? And I'm like, and so we kind of laugh about that now that she has a better appreciation. But I will say also, from an expense perspective, life was a lot cheaper overseas. We didn't shop at all of the expat places. We shopped like a local would in every place that we lived. And so we were able to not pay the crazy prices. So coming back, it was definitely shocking.
Well, I know you guys are coming up to the city. You can let Jake know he has another shock when my entire apartment fits in probably the kitchen behind him right now. So tell him he has another shock coming, in terms of sticker shock.
Yep.
So to wrap up kind of travel, I know maybe a while before you guys travel again, you have a big switch coming back here. What's the next place on the list? Did you guys go back somewhere that you didn't get to hit because your time in Vienna was cut short? Do you want to try somewhere totally new, throw a dart at a map? What's your plan?
So I will say a couple of weeks ago was family weekend at our daughter's university, and it was really cool because it was the first time we did like a road trip. We thought about flying, but flying is just hard to do. And by the time we figured out a rental car that would accommodate Jake's wheelchair and what have you, we're just going to drive. And we got a accessible room. And Jake said to me as we were going to sleep that night, he said to Sean and I, guys, this really reaffirmed my confidence that I can travel again. And I'll talk about that in a minute too, because of what we were able to accomplish to go back to Vienna for Alex's high school graduation. But we are going back to Vienna next summer to get his bionic arm. So they're very excited about it, and have worked through some of the logistics already. But yeah, that's going to be the first international trip on the docket, at least.
That's what you say now. I don't know if I buy that. I feel like if I talk to you in a couple of months, you're gonna be like, "Oh, we added in 3 more trips," but, before
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So, I think we've alluded a lot to, Jake and what he's been through a year ago when you guys, came back to the States. So maybe before we get into, what happened last year, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Jake as a person, because I think it really sets the stage for what he went through and how he recovered, what he liked, what was he like?
So Jake was in ninth grade, and he has always been very curious, and like I'm sure most parents would say, a precocious child. He'll tell me I'm wearing mom goggles. He is very modest, but he's an avid traveler who's hit 6 of the 7 continents. Straight A student. He played varsity baseball as a freshman. And really developed a love of music quite early on, which I totally credit my husband for, because my husband just is a total music file. And so he started playing piano when we lived in Thailand, and you could rent a piano for $1 a day, no joke. So we did, and I play a little bit, but Jake far surpassed me early on. So he ended up pursuing lessons both when we were in Virginia and in Sweden, and in Vienna. He had the all-time best teacher. She is just professionally and personally a wonderful person, but she really pushed him. And I think that was also part of why he loved Vienna so much, was because he had great teachers, but particularly Mrs. Heedles. So he developed a love of expensive cologne and sneakers, which I think is hilarious. So we made him use his allowance for that. And one of the things that he really developed a love for in Vienna was street art. And, I grew up in New York City in the 80s, and the only kids that did graffiti and street art were the hooligans, as I like to say. But there, it's really embraced. And the high school would take kids on field trips to see different murals and backings. And the city did a great job of repainting the walls of the canals or the walls of train yards so that the artists had new murals that they could work on. So we were really proud of his abilities. But in terms of who he is as a person, I said he's modest. He's, straight A student, very athletic. He would go to the gym an hour before school, meet his friends, come home, shower, go to school, and then go to the gym again an hour after. And truly, I think it was his level of physical fitness that definitely helped save his life. But when he was 13 and starting graffiti, we were asking him, like, what's your tag, right? I thought it was all cool. Like, I can ask him, like, oh, I know what the slang is. And he said, it's at that point, it was ciento and then a series of numbers. And I said, you don't even speak Spanish. Isn't that Spanish? And he said, yeah, it's I feel. And I said, well, what are the numbers? And he said, well, they are the binary representation of, and there was a long explanation, but truly what it meant was, I feel grateful. And I said, well, what are you grateful for? That's a big statement for a 13-year-old to incorporate in his graffiti tag. And he said, I just feel grateful for my life and for my family. And he has adjusted that over time. So instead of ciento with the series of numbers, it's now cieno. And it's really was cool going through when we went back to Vienna in May. It was a lot. You would see cieno throughout the city, and it was very cool that he had done that in all appropriate places. But that was his tag. So I think that's the best representation of who he is. He's just a very old soul. And it was funny too, once he got hurt, I got a lot of emails from kids at the school and their parents. And most of them were kids I hadn't heard their names. So they weren't his immediate group of friends. And one of the children said to me, Mrs. Kennedy, I want you to know what your son has done for me. I was a new kid and I was feeling really alone. And my own friends that I had made kind of peripherally didn't notice that I was having a hard time. And your son, who was not in my friend group saw me one day after school and just looked sad. And he asked me if I wanted to play baseball. And I played baseball with him for 3 weeks in a row. And then he invited me to the popular kids table. And he said, your son literally made me stop thinking, I'm trying to think of how he said it, made me stop thinking the worst thoughts a child could have. And I just heard that over and over and over from people. And, as a parent, that's all you really want, like your child to be a good person and help other people. And I'm very proud of him. So
I think also maybe you should be a little bit proud of yourself because you kind of raised that kid. Let's be clear. I think you get some credit in it. But I agree. As I read the notes, we'll talk a little bit about those sites, but as I read the notes that were, into to him, everyone was saying how amazing he was as a human being. And we talk a lot about that in my house. Penny went through kind of a tough year with some bullying last year. And I was saying how heartbreaking it was. And my mom said, yeah, you're better off having that kid than the kid who's doing the bullying. You're a kid, you can help her. You can get to the point where she's confident, and she's a good kid. And I think that's all we really want is our kids to be good kids, right?
Yeah.
So can you start talking a little bit about what happened last December? We've obviously alluded to it in a couple different ways, and it's obviously an emotional story, and hopefully you and I keep our eyes dry. Tell me what happened.
Yeah. So it was the start of winter break in Vienna. And on the 29th of December, we had full reservations and plans to visit friends of ours who lived in Lusaka, Zambia. So we had the trip booked, we had safaris booked with them, and they are dear friends of ours that we hadn't seen in a long time. Meanwhile, one of Jake's best friends was moving back to the US 6 months earlier than scheduled. And Sean and I were at a dinner with work friends, and Jake texted and said, hey, I really want to spend time with this boy before he leaves. And I said, are you packed? And he said, well, I can get packed tomorrow, Mom. I'm just going to throw stuff in. And I said, well, what are you guys going to do? And he said, well, we're going to paint, and then I'm going to go sleep over his house. And again, this was something that we have done, or they have done repeatedly, like over and over. And one of the things too, I think my kid miss about Europe is the safety and frequency and availability of public transportation. My mom used to say to me, I was never worried when you started driving. I was worried when you got into cars with other kids because I didn't know how they drove. And for Alex, our daughter, it was a lot easier because it was always public transportation. None of the 18-year-olds drove. Anyway, so it wasn't a big deal to say, yeah, okay, you can go do that, as they've done many times before. Unfortunately, this was a site that he had learned about from other kids at high school, but it's not marked that it's high voltage. And so what ended up happening is that Jake was on a ladder and with a spray paint can in an area that is marked for graffiti. And I did not know, but electricity can arc. I'm a liberal arts girl, so this whole engineering and electrical stuff was beyond me. But we lived in Thailand for 3 years, and there was always live wires literally hanging down. And we always told the kids, can't touch that, whatever. But not knowing that it can arc. So he was in an area he'd been to several times before, and he was electrocuted in his dominant arm, so his right arm, and then he fell about 10 feet off the ladder. His friend actually saved his life. Apparently there was an explosion. The kid kind of started running thinking Jake was right behind him. He wasn't. The kid went back and called the police and called us and called his parents. But the electricity that entered his arm ultimately caused his kidneys to fail. So he had to be on dialysis that first night. And then we later found out that his break was at the T4, T5. And so that rendered him paralyzed. So that was how the fall happened.
And you were at dinner when you got this phone call?
So we were at dinner when he called to say, can he go? And meanwhile, Sean and I left to come home, and friends of ours wanted to borrow our ski equipment because we were going to Africa over Christmas. They were going skiing. Can we borrow it? So our basement of our very old European apartment building has no cell service. and we were in the basement going through the storage and it was only like 10 minutes.
Mhm.
But it was during those 10 minutes when everybody started calling. So we come back up off the elevator with our friends in tow, and I hear my daughter yelling from the apartment, like screaming. And so we run in, and she said, Mom, there's been an accident. Like, it turns out my son's friend who he was with,
Mhm.
his sister is a good friend of my daughter.
Mhm.
So when they couldn't get a hold of us in those 6 minutes or 10 minutes that we were downstairs, they called our daughter. And I'm like, what do you mean an accident? Thinking, of course, he broke his leg, like something, right? I never in a million years would have
Thinking
thought.
I was going to delay my leaving for
Right?
my trip by a few hours, right?
Yep, exactly. So we ran literally to the hospital, and our Jake's friend's dad was there and said, it's not good, and we're not sure what's going to happen. And then we just kind of kept asking, like, what's the status? What's the status? And they finally said, we don't think he's going to make it. And so they told us that for the first 5 days. We don't think he's going to make it. He's on the razor's edge. So that's what happened. Yeah.
And you stayed in the hospital? You went back home?
So Austria is very rule focused,
Mhm.
and this was incredibly difficult because they only had visiting hours, even for minors, was an only set block of 3 hours a day.
Wow.
For the
Wow.
first 4 weeks, he was in the ICU for 6 weeks. For the first 4 weeks, he was in a medically induced coma. So we would go those 3 hours and just talk to him, and we got to know the nurses. I brought them a lot of food and treats so they would let us stay longer. And the embassy rallied in a way that was humbling and amazing. So they would help us. At this point, Alex is still trying to go to school and finish her senior year. And so I had people offering to drive her because she would have to leave school early to be able to come make the full 3-hour block at the hospital. People did meal trains. It was incredible how the community rallied. And again, like, these are things you never think would happen to anyone, never mind you. And they're telling us, like, it's almost every parent's worst nightmare. Like, thank God he survived, but for 5 days we weren't sure. So some of my girlfriends kind of rallied and put together a calendar of who was flying to Vienna, Austria, to be with us or take care of things. My mom and my brother were so wonderful, and they came. My mom came for a month. My brother, his wife and kids were wonderful and said, yeah, Jared, you have to go. And he was with us for 2 weeks. And then we just had a series of people stay with us to do whatever was needed. And that was kind of really how we were able to get through. But we did not know during those whole 4 weeks if he had any brain damage.
Mhm.
We didn't know if he would be able to use his residual arm.
Mhm.
We just didn't know. And so with a lot of prayer and a lot of support from our families, he started coming out of the coma, and they started weaning back his medication when they thought they could. He was getting stronger. And, he had like 8 surgeries in those 4 weeks. And he literally woke up on Alex's 18th birthday. And so he woke up, and we could tell that he couldn't really talk yet. He was still on a trach, breathing tube. And so they had like the letter chart. And so we did that for about a week. And then they were able to get him to talk a little bit. One of the amazing blessings, it's hard to think of anything as being a blessing or positive during this, but I really had to force myself to be grateful for when things happen, is a world-renowned upper extremity plastic surgeon, actually lives in Vienna. He was on vacation the week that Jake got hurt. And when he heard about Jake's case, he came back from vacation early, and he actually did the amputation. So not only is he a world-renowned reconstruction surgeon, he's a leader in the field of osseointegration. And he was able to do the amputation, and it's really kind of just right here. There's only a little bit of residual skin left, to best position it that if Jake wants to get a bionic arm that will be controlled with brains and nerves and things that are far beyond my understanding, but you probably know better than I do, Jess. So he was able to come back, do the surgery, and then that is who we're going to go see next summer. So about, a year and a half after the accident, to have the bionic arm put in. But he basically had 3 life-altering injuries. He had severe burns, which we're still dealing with wound care every day. It takes us about 2 hours to get him ready in the morning. So he has severe burns on the back of his residual arm, his lower limbs. He has his dominant arm amputated, and of course the paralysis.
And then the arm was amputated because of the electricity, because of the current.
Yep.
And the paralysis is just below breathing level.
Yeah, it's
he breathes on his own, right?
Breathe on his own. Yeah.
But everything below that, more or less paralyzed, right?
Yeah. No sensation, no motor function.
Okay. And in the beginning, first of all, when did you start telling people? Was that a decision that you wanted supports? Did you want to close rank and kind of block off support? How did that thought process go for you and Sean? Because I imagine that's putting it out there is making it real, but you also need support. And obviously you have amazing supports who came in. So how did that decision go for you guys?
That's a really good question. Also, Jess, you know us both really well. And I'm an uptight, very, very New Yorker, very much a New York person. My husband is a laid back artist from Colorado. And I do love my friends. I love people. I love making new friends. And my husband has wonderful friends, but is much more of a private person. And so I knew I needed support, and he and I talked about it. And my one girlfriend and my brother said, that's it. We don't want people bothering you and texting you. But we do need to tell people, plus we need to cancel your whole trip that was going on in 2 days. And that's when my girlfriend came up with the CaringBridge site and said, hey, there's this website. It's like a blog for people who are experiencing some kind of medical issue. And we are, I want to put this on there. And Sean and I said, yeah, that's great. Because Sean also has a huge family that's located throughout the US. And so it was an easier way for us to kind of communicate. And in those early days, there was so much to communicate. And we didn't know if he was going to make it. And so that was really helpful.
Can you talk a little bit? I'll go back. Well, maybe tell us a little bit what CaringBridge is, if people want to be able to read about your story, or if they ever have a need to use the site.
So if you go to caringbridge.com, it is a free site that basically you can set up a page for anybody. It doesn't have to be the person that it's about. And it basically just lets the administrators kind of post what's happening, and it could be whatever you want to do on a daily basis, a hourly basis, a weekly basis. And you can put up to 5 pictures per entry, and you can actually also do YouTube links. The nice part about it, again, it's all free and it's very well run. They have a tribute section on it, and that tribute section is for donations to CaringBridge to help maintain their site. And then it also allows you to connect to, if you were going to do like a ways to help, like a GoFundMe or meal train. And so there's a lot of different options that you can kind of, if you go to that site, you can see how you can help somebody going through the process. For us, it was mainly a tool to communicate with a broad spectrum of people. I'm still floored that we have like 2,700 individual subscribers on it. And they're all people that are either our friends, our family, friends of friends, people who've heard about the stories or heard about our story. And it's really been helpful. And on the days where sometimes you forget, it's been 10 months, you forget that there's really a lot of progress, because there's still days that are hard. But if I go back, you can also go back, just to right at the beginning. And for me, if I really were to go back to those early dark days in late December and early January, when we did not know where he was going to end up, it does help me think, oh, wow, you know what, we have come far away.
I think for someone who's never used the site before, for the audience to hear, it's also amazing because, you can communicate with I could communicate with you without texting you and bothering you when I didn't know what your hours were. You were living overseas. I didn't know what the hospital was like. But maybe even nicer for me, I could read what other people were posting and I
Mhm.
could get to know Jake. I haven't seen him in years through people's messages. And it gave me solace to see how supportive you were during this, right? So I
Yeah.
think it helps to make that network feel real. Um, how did you get through the first 5 days? I mean, I don't understand how you left the hospital. I don't understand how you slept at night. I don't understand how you ate. I mean, obviously, these are all things you had to do, by the way, but I'm just saying, how how do you do that? How do you put one foot in front of the other and survive?
I mean, you go on autopilot. That is 100%, right? Like you just know, I knew there were certain things that had to get done. Whether it was helping Alex, like just being there for our daughter. And then everyone knew that you don't talk to us between 2 and 7, right? Like you just were there at the
Mhm.
hospital. And knowing that he was in a coma, even though it was medically induced, we knew that he could hear us. We were trying really hard to do whatever we could to make sure he knew we were with him the whole time, even if we presently weren't there. So I put out and said, "Hey, there's no Wi-Fi really in the ICU, but we have an old school like boombox. So any of his friends, if you want to make him like discs of favorite music." And we just had that constantly playing. I put up pictures, like big pictures in the wall, in the room, of both who he was, and then with the intention of taking them down once he woke up, because I didn't want to have a bad reminder, but for the doctors and the nurses to know, like, he looks like this right now, but this is like an amazing, talented young man with a bright future ahead of him. Please take good care of him. And so we put up big pictures of him playing piano or him doing art or him with his friends. Um, and I think those little tasks kind of help me stay focused on like what I can do and feel like I'm helping. We brought, cake and cookies to the doctors. We made signs for them in German saying, "Thank you for taking care of our son." And then like literally we just, every time we were there, we tell the nurses, "Please keep the music on. He loves music. These are CDs that, Sean's brother sent a bunch of CDs from Nebraska. His friends made CDs. People were doing all kinds of amazing things. And that's kind of, I think those small tasks, like I didn't just sit at home. I mean, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. Like, let's be honest, right? Like I didn't do any of those things. But I was like, okay, today I need to make sure that I go pick up CDs from this friend, or I need to make sure that Alex has XYZ ready to go for school, whatever it was, and just kind of focus on the moment, because I knew he was in excellent hands, but I had no control. And as a, type A New Yorker, like that's kind of like the antithesis of my being. So that was kind of how I had to go through it.
You said you knew he was in excellent hands. For me, I trained here. To me, all medical care should be given in New York City. I'm very, I've drank the Kool-Aid, right? How,
Mhm.
how did you feel being in a hospital where I assume their primary language isn't English, and you don't know the schools they went to, and
Mhm.
you're a foreigner to them, and how was your faith in it? How did you keep your faith in the system over there?
That's a great question. This is where I cannot thank the government enough and how supportive they were. So uh, the day after Jake's accident, one of the senior medical doctors based in Europe came and was by our side. And then they switched out doctors as schedules needed. So, literally, for the entire 6 weeks that we were in the ICU, not only did we have some of the best doctors, and even early on, the doctor that did the amputation, like I was researching him, I was listening to his TED Talks, I was doing all of that stuff,
Mhm.
and knowing that, wow, this guy really is like one of the best in the world. And he's actually one of the reasons why we're coming up to New York, as Jessica knows, but for the audience, is because this particular doctor has been asked to be the keynote speaker at an NYU conference on upper limb prosthetics and osseointegration. So I knew that we were in good hands with him, but then having the American doctors kind of translate, not German, but medical speak to me. And plus, I'm just blessed to have friends like Jessica and my friend Stacy, who's also in the medical field, and like just be able to translate a lot of this and be like, yeah, this is exactly what we would do. Or when we were sitting in the waiting room at the ICU and the doc would say, yeah, he actually does need a breathing tube, which we didn't think he would need at first. So I would turn to the American doctor and say, okay, what does that look like? What is the long-term prognosis of that? How does that help him? Is this something we really need to do? And I think that helps a lot.
I think, we said it's the first 5 days were touch and go, but I think that, as a parent who's been through this now and as a physician, we both know it's not 5 days and then it's easy. It's you get 2 steps forward and then there's a step back, and the step backs are brutal when you've just finally made 2 steps forward, right? Again, now he needs a breathing tube. Now he needs another surgery. How many surgeries has he had in total?
Tomorrow, we were supposed to have one more tomorrow, which was rescheduled, but I think it would have been 13.
Okay. So this was not, 5 days and then it was, like smooth sailing, to be clear.
Yep.
How do you and Sean come together during this? And it's a really personal question, I know, but I see the other side of it, right? I see the families that don't survive trauma as well. I see both. I see the families that get through it together and the ones that it's really hard in a marriage and it doesn't work. What were you and Sean able to do for each other during this?
So
did you say, don't talk to me for the next 6 months and then we'll talk again?
No, in the beginning, I think we both were just kind of in shock and just kind of autopilot. We were so thankful to have our close friends. He had close friends come. I had close friends come. My family came. And I think that helped. I think we also are such different people that we kind of realize that each of us brings different strengths to this. And understanding that each other has complementary strengths is something that is really positive that's come out of this. Because before, like if someone's kind of different from you, you're just kind of get irritated, just normal life, right? You just get irritated, like, oh, they didn't handle it the way that I would have. But then you realize, no, actually they did it better than I would have. And so there was some of that. But the real hard part too, for me, to be quite honest, is we left Austria. The government airlifted us to Shepherd. Once Jake was stable, we realized that, or we were told by the highest ups of the medical community and the government, that Shepherd Center in Atlanta is the premier rehabilitation center for spinal cord injury. There's another one in Craig out west. And then there's other ones like Shirley Ryan in Chicago. But for us, it was Shepherd Center. And so Jake and I were airlifted in a small Gulf Stream with like 3 stops. The poor kid was, in the back of the plane, and he had bruises all over his little body because he was on a stretcher. But we got to Shepherd, and it was really hard because Alex didn't want us to go do rehab in the US. She's like, Mom, they're great doctors here. Why are you not staying in Austria? And again, this was February of her senior year. And I said, Al, like so much of the research I did talked about a lot of progress is determined by the relationship between the patient and the physical therapist, occupational therapist, mental therapist. And as much as Jake spoke German well, like for me, I knew we had to come back to the States. So on top of dealing with all that trauma, now Jake and I are literally in a different continent, a different time zone. Sean stayed with Alex, and she was mad. She was, it was her last couple of months. She was going to go to university. I didn't get to go be at her prom, help her look for dresses, all of that. But when they came, we flew February 6th. And the 3rd week of February was what the Europeans call ski week. And they flew to us. And when they saw the level of care that Shepherd provides, she saw right away. She's like, Mom, this was the best decision. Like everything here is done with love. There's nothing transactional here. She saw the relationship that Jake at that point was already appointed the mayor of the floor because he would, just be very friendly and kind of engage with all of the nurses and the techs and the doctors and the respiratory therapists and physical therapists that were coming in the room. And so they got to see. They also came back in April for spring break. And I think just kind of dividing and conquering wasn't easy at all. But it really helped. And like Sean, I just knew that Sean would take care of everything in Vienna and take care of Alex, and I would do everything in Atlanta. But it was funny. One of the things that I think really helped is on the day we arrived, which was again February 6th, Shepherd does a great job of having the patients and the families articulate goals. And Jake's goal was to be able to fly back to Vienna for Alex's high school graduation, which was in late May, early June. And the doctors kind of pulled me aside and they said, look, it's a laudable goal. It really is. But we need to temper his expectations. He has 3 life-altering injuries with the burns, the amputation, the paralysis. We just don't think it's going to happen. And lo and behold, his determination and his amazing team at Shepherd, and it truly is a testament to them, got him to the point of where on May 27th, literally 5 months to the day of the accident, we discharged that morning. And that night, he and I were on a flight alone commercially to Vienna, and we were home for days. And so it was really amazing. And it was just really a testament to him and the care. But we did it and we went home. And in that process, during that whole time, we had made the decision that Shepherd was such an amazing place that we were not going to move back to Northern Virginia, which is where we had planned to move over the summer, but we were going to move to Atlanta because they have paraplegic sports that are wonderful. And they just all knew Jake at that point. And it was really important to us to have him continue that care. But during that time, I also had to, once we made that decision, figure out, well, where's he going to go to school? He's only starting 10th grade. And the public schools were huge here. So I started interviewing private schools, like 17 of them, started looking for places to live. I had to buy a car, all the while still being the primary caregiver for him. And then, helping Alex with college applications in the middle of the night. So that was how that all worked out. But I think knowing and trusting Sean was going to do a great job and take care of everything, and knowing we had this goal and it looked like we were going to make it. And thanks to Shepherd for showing us, they do an airport outing. They really try to normalize the paraplegia side of things. So they have an airport outing where they take patients to Atlanta International Airport, and they partner with Delta, and they basically have you do everything except have the plane take off. Mm-hmm. So we kind of knew, okay, this is what to expect at TSA. Mm-hmm. This is what to expect with an aisle chair and what have you. And by that point, Jake, only having one arm, refused to use a power chair. He was like, Mom, I feel like a sick kid in this. I don't want it. I'm going to use a manual chair. And I said, Jake, you have one arm. But he's only used a manual chair since about April.
Obviously I met Jake in the hospital when he was born, but I think I messaged you this when this was going on. My earliest concrete memory of Jake is you saying to me one day, I think he was either 7 or 8 months. He was ridiculously young. And you saying to me, Jake's walking, and I just said to you, okay, that's amazing. And in my head, I was like, by walking, you mean he's leaning on the wall and sliding down the hall. There's no way this kid walks. It's just not possible. I've been doing this for, by that point, a decade, much longer now. Well, maybe not quite a decade, but anyway, and being there's no way he's walking, but sure, Alana. And then I went to your house and I hear this noise and I turn and I saw, tottering down the hall from your bedroom down to the living room, this little tiny kid walking. And I was like, oh my God, she's not crazy. He walks. And so, that was my mantra to myself when I was reading the updates, that's Jake. He's gonna do what he says he's gonna do. He's going to make it to Alex's graduation because he walked when he was 8 months old or 7 months old, and that's my memory of him. So just to back up. So, 5 days, you didn't know if he was going to make it. Then you had the next 2 months almost, and in the hospital. He was in a medically induced coma for a month. He came to, he had a breathing tube for some period of time. He
Yep.
had multiple surgeries. So by the time you were discharged from Vienna, you knew about the paralysis. He had had his amputation. He was breathing on his own at that point.
No, he still came to Shepherd with a trach.
So he was on a trach. So he got trached. So for
Mhm.
our audience who doesn't know, you can only leave a true like intubation tube in for so long. It causes a lot of swelling. So if it's going to be a longer period of time, you put in a trach through the neck to allow them to breathe through. Um, you flew with him lying down for how many hours?
We flew from Vienna to Ireland, Ireland to Maine, Maine to Atlanta, and I think it must have been 14 hours, 12,
Right.
14
With him
hours.
on a stretcher in the back of a small plane, not breathing on his own, just to
Correct.
like be clear. Okay.
Yep.
You land in Atlanta, a city you don't really know, and you go to a hospital you don't, or a rehab center you don't know. And
Right.
then can you like summarize somehow what the next, 3 months from when you got there in mid-February
Yeah.
until you left? I think you said in May, mid-May, end of May,
Yeah,
right?
May 27th.
Yeah.
Yep.
What transpired in those 3 months?
Well, first, I just want to say we are so lucky to have the friends and family we do. My brother, who had been in Vienna with us for the first 2 weeks, came back. And then he flew to Atlanta that very day that we arrived. So he was already checked in for us. He did all of the paperwork necessary. And he stayed with me for the first few days so that, like, because he knew I was going to be jet lagged and all of that. The very first night we were in the ICU, Shepherd actually does have an ICU. And they kind of started him slowly that first week. And they are amazing between speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, mental therapy. And then they also have an academic advisor who is fantastic. And she works with the kids because they have a whole adolescent program. So everyone in theory in kind of this section are still school-age children, which is sad that it needs to happen with such frequency. But she liaised with Jake's international school in Vienna to keep him on track. And he finished ninth grade without ever stepping foot in the classroom, a real classroom, that whole second semester. So he continued with school and then
He's
just,
not repeating a year, Alana?
mm-mm,
He didn't repeat a year?
nope,
Oh, I
he's in
didn't
10th
realize.
grade.
Amazing.
And
It's insane. I mean,
And
amazing.
and not only in 10th grade, but we put him in all kind of regular classes, to be honest, because we just didn't know what his mental bandwidth would be with all the other
Mhm.
stuff going on. And he was in school for 2 weeks, and the dean was like, he needs to be back in all honors classes. Like, this is way too easy for him.
Right.
So, no, he didn't end up repeating anything. He finished ninth grade. And I really think part of it is because the school in Vienna was so supportive and
Mhm.
wonderful. And the academic advisor at Shepherd just kept them on
Mhm.
track. Um,
How many
so
hours a day of therapy did he have?
usually about, it was like 6 to 8 if school was included.
Mhm.
So sometimes he had, yeah, I mean, let me rewind because they do a lot of ADL, so assisted daily living, right?
Mhm.
Activities. So it's not technically therapy, but they would teach us like how to do a shower, or they would teach us what have you outside of the formal therapy hours. And to be quite honest, thankfully, I haven't had a lot of experience with this, but I looked at somebody who was in a wheelchair and would say, "Oh, those poor people can't walk." I never thought about things like bowel program, bladder program, skincare, having to do frequent weight shifts. Like, how many times have I used my hands or moved in this chair? And since we've been talking, and they have to make a deliberate thought process about, okay, if I've been sitting in my chair for more than 30 minutes, I need to do a weight shift because I can get sores. So there was a lot more, and Shepherd does a fantastic job of education. They also do peer support where other individuals, generally in their 20s and 30s, who've gone through this and were patients at Shepherd, will come and visit the patients. And that's built into the day too. So you'd have an hour of peer support at 3 o'clock where an individual would come and say, okay, what are you struggling with this week? And then Saturdays, they did usually 1 or 2 hours of therapy. And then Sundays, like the whole floor would just sleep, like you would see. And because Jake needed so much help, like overnight, just because he only had the one arm. So it's not even like he could reach for water or anything. On top of being paralyzed, I slept in the room. And so I lived at the hospital in his room for that entire time. And honestly, it didn't even bother me because I was so traumatized for not being able to stay with him in Vienna. Shepherd Center gives you an apartment for your first 30 days as inpatient, and I didn't even want it because I wanted to just stay with him. So for, that whole period, so February, March, April, May, 4 months, I slept on that pull-out chair that they have in the hospital. And went down, they have a nice gym, so I would shower there. And if he had a day of therapies, I would either go if I could learn something and learn how to help him,
Mhm.
or if it was something that was like school, I would just try to go walk the track at the gym. Or I was also continuing to work through all of this and trying to be there for my Vienna team. So I was trying to also make sure that when I left, that there weren't questions or whatever I can do to help from afar. So work was super flexible and they let me do that, but the days were full.
What was Jake's first outing out of Shepherd?
So one of the first ones was like to a bowling alley. It's called the Painted Duck.
Odd
Um,
choice for
yeah,
given his injuries.
but again, they just wanted them. I mean, they do it as a group, right?
Yeah.
And then they knew that he liked graffiti.
Mhm.
So they took us there's this place called the Krog Street Tunnel where he could, and they actually went out and brought him spray paint so he could tag in the tunnel. His occupational therapist was fantastic about pushing him to start doing art again with his non-dominant arm. And even had him take like a highlighter on the mirror at the hospital and put his tag on.
Mhm.
And I will say, and I did every night like letters with him. And his handwriting is actually better with his non-dominant arm than it ever was with his dominant arm.
I mean, the picture I saw that he did with his non-dominant arm was better than anything I could draw with my dominant arm, let's be clear, but still pretty a pretty strong task to give him. Like, now you have
Yeah.
one arm, and it's not even the arm that you are used to performing your tasks with, right?
Yeah, and one of the other things I wanted to say about an outing is, you'll remember, Jess, I think you came with us. Sean and I have been following the Dropkick Murphys for
Mhm,
20 years.
mhm.
And, they did all the soundtrack to Martin Scorsese's The Departed and a whole host of other things.
We
So
went to
Sean,
Terminal 5.
right? Remember?
Mhm. Terminal 5.
So Sean and I, we bought Sean and the kids tickets to go see them. They were coming to Vienna, I think it was February-ish. January, February. So, of course, with the accident, we gave up the tickets. And then Sean texted our little family chat and said, "Hey guys, they're coming to Atlanta." And I was like, "Oh, well, I'll just leave the hospital and go." Right. So we were talking to Jake's physical therapist, and he said, "Well, why can't we go?" And I said, "We're living in a hospital. Have you seen him?" He's like, he still had a trait. Like, it was, I don't think we can do that. And he said, "I think we can do that as a recreational event." So I ended up buying tickets for his PT, his OT, his mental therapist, and the rec therapist. And I had friends visiting at the time. And we actually went to the Murphys 1 month into our stay. They were at one of the arenas here. And through friends of friends, we were able to get Jake's story in front of them and tell them, of course, that Sean and I had been long-term fans. So they did a shout out to Jake in the beginning of the show, and then a shout out to Shepherd Center. And I actually, when I briefed Shepherd Center's board of directors not too long ago, I included that because a lot of them hadn't heard that
Mhm.
Shepherd Center was mentioned at that concert, but it was one of our favorite outings.
And maybe we'll show now where he's come, if that's okay with you. Maybe
Of
we'll
course.
pause for a minute. Maybe we can show a little clip of him from the beginning, before everything that happened, playing the piano. I like people to see where he came out of the Vienna hospital. I think it's a really powerful statement from there until where he is, more or less now. I mean, now he's back at school. So let's do that. Let's start with the piano. And then maybe we'll show a photo now of him when he left. This is a photo from when he left Vienna, correct? And
The first day at Shepherd. Yep.
the degree of, I mean, weight loss. I think I think none of us realize what just gravity alone does for building muscle, right? Just getting out of bed and walking, not doing anything else. And then upon discharge from Shepherd, I mean, the amount of bulking up he did to me is incredible. His attitude is, look at him. I mean, and then that's his arm that he doesn't wear, you said, right? On his right arm.
Yeah. He said that it's a lot easier to not, that he's learned to function without it until he gets his bionic arm. And his left bicep has grown so quickly that he has stretch marks now, like around it. But one of the other things too, and I neglected to mention, and I apologize, is one of the other things that Jake really got seized with during his recovery is the fact that 8 children suffered the same type of accident that he had suffered. And they weren't kids like the kids that like ride the trams or do stupid things. They're kids that went to high voltage areas and did not know. 2 of those children did not make it. So when we went back in late May, early June, the doctor, one of the plastic surgeons who's basically heading up an advocacy awareness project, was telling us that she's just tired of seeing all these kids come through and would we like to contribute? And Jake totally was all over it. So he sent videos when we were back. We did a documentary that basically talked about these high voltage areas and the problems with them. And ultimately, they just did a press conference in early October. OBB, which is the national rail line for Austria, recently implemented new security measures to include bigger fencing or actual fencing and bigger signage that alerts people that there's high voltage in the area. And so we're hoping that through these efforts, mainly under the guidance and leadership of Dr. Koenig, who is just a fantastic individual, that this can be prevented in the future.
And Jake is part of those.
Yeah, he was the one. Yep. So we were filmed. He really kind of did a lot for the documentary. The producer wanted us to go back to the scene of the accident, which was a little tough, but he said he wanted to do it. And we did. And then when they did the big press conference, Dr. Koenig asked us for a video of Jake to give his sentiments to OBB. And then it was kind of funny to see it kind of translated into German, or the documentary has us speaking in English and then we're dubbed into German. But I'm really proud of his efforts, because if another family can be spared this, like these kids, I remember you asked me about how I felt that first night, and I was like, oh my God, what was he doing? And I was like, like, you're just like, what? Like, and how am I going to tell, like, my New York family, like my son was like a graffiti artist. And I remember that. And one of my close friends in Vienna came over that first night and said, Alana, he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything, like, he was doing what he thought was safe. The school had brought him to this place. And oh, by the way, he's 14. And if I, went right instead of left 100 times in my life, I would be dead or in jail. And so it was a really good time for me to kind of focus on that. And I know for your audience too, like, there's a lot of struggles, of course, involved in all of this. But one of the things that I try to be super aware of is Jake, I'm trying to make him not feel guilty for the fact that we've made serious life changes because of this accident, through no fault of any of ours. And in the blink of an eye, in an instant, it wasn't like we as parents were drunk driving with them in the car. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It was just, we're just your normal family. Yeah, we've lived a lot, but of overseas places, but we're just like a normal family with kids and trying to do the right thing. And one day you wake up like this. And one of the things that I know we've really tried to be proactive with Jake is like, hey, you didn't do anything wrong. Like, you weren't like taking unnecessary risk. You're a wonderful artist and we want you to continue that. I mean, would I have gone to a train yard when I was 15 to paint? Probably not, but that's what they encouraged. I've done my own share of stupid things. I think we all have. So I really wanted to make sure we addressed that head on, and it wasn't an elephant in the room where Jake couldn't say to us, Mom, I feel guilty, or it just worse, internalize that guilt, because it is hard. It's, Sean and I spend 2 hours in the morning and an hour at night doing his daily care. And on top of just all that other stuff, we never really were going to live in it. I mean, we never would have lived in Atlanta. So,
I just want that to sink in for people who are listening. He spent 2 hours in the morning doing his care. Like, I can barely get my kids out of the house with a lunch packed, and we're so chaotic in the morning. And you have 2 hours before your day even starts.
mhm.
It's still a lot of work. And I think that as the outside people, we don't realize that. We just see it as, look, he's out of the hospital. He survived. Yes, he's in a wheelchair, but he's got a system and it works. And like, no one, I don't think it's hard to dig deeper and realize what that really means on a day-to-day basis still is, do you have to shift him overnight?
No, we bought a particular mattress that kind of does it. And actually, he's really good and he's developed so much strength. Like, he almost will turn his upper body and then the bottom just kind of follows
Yeah.
it, just like we would do when we're sleeping. But as a fail-safe measure, we have this air mattress underneath he's in a normal bed. He refused to use a hospital bed. So he, with one arm, pulls himself up. But underneath him is the mattress that kind of fluctuates how, which part is inflated at what point.
Kind of like those things they put on your legs after you give birth that like
Yes.
presses
Yes.
your legs,
Yes.
but it's a mattress version.
Exactly.
I didn't know that existed. Okay. So this is not your first, unfortunately, or maybe it's to the benefit. This is not your first time through the medical system, right? Alex, your daughter, has been through the medical system. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And then what were you able to learn from that maybe helped you? Is there anything learnable about the American healthcare system?
Yeah. So again, normal family. I was 27 weeks into what was at that point a very normal pregnancy. I went for ultrasound and they basically told me that I had excess amniotic fluid and they didn't know why. And I was like, oh, okay, should I be worried? No, you're not going to be worried, but you're being admitted to the hospital for the duration of the pregnancy. And I was like, wait, what? And I was 29. And so I just had I didn't understand. And so I was, and then they still didn't know. The best they could tell me is that she's either drinking too much, she's peeing too much, or there's just some weird anomaly. Like, they didn't really know what it was. Well, it turns out she, after all that bed rest, we still had to induce her. She didn't want to come out. And then at 8 days old, due to jaundice, she had jaundice from the beginning, but at 8 days, they did a test and found that she has a very rare kidney condition, does not run in our family. I mean, Sean and I take no medicine, right? Like, we have been a healthy family, thank God. But has this kidney condition, and they had never seen an actual case of it, was what the intern told me at the hospital where we had her.
It makes you feel pretty good. It's always a really reassuring thing to hear from your medical staff.
And like hands me a stack of like internet research that she had printed out. And it's a condition called Bartter syndrome. And really what it is, it just manifests as a electrolyte imbalance. The nephrons in the kidneys do not retain enough magnesium and potassium, and you tend to have some other issues, but not, if it's caught early, it's not as bad. But of course, this was worst case scenario. So she won't grow. She will be developmentally delayed. There's potassium in your ears. So sometimes with severe deficiency, you can end up deaf, muscular development issues, all of it. So at this point, we're in the ICU, and where the nephrologists that are the kidney doctors are suggesting she needs to take high dosages of indomethacin, which is like a Advil, right? It's like an NSAID, which of course to adults like rip up your stomach. Well, the stomach doctor was like, absolutely not. And so finally they at one point made me believe, this is all within like the first 2 months, right? So we would be in and out of the hospital, and the only way to check for potassium and magnesium deficiencies is by a blood test at the hospital. It's not like diabetes where you can check it with a finger prick at home. So we would go to the hospital for we think she looks normal, she's fine. And we do a test and we drive back thinking it's going to be fine. And at one point they called and said, Mrs. Kennedy, what's Alex doing? And I'm like, oh, she's on her baby blanket, like cooing, making eyes. They're like, we need you to come back to the ER. And I was like, what? Like, we just got back. And they said, with numbers, like she had like 110 potassium, which at that point she should be dead or seizing is what they told me. I might have gotten the value wrong, but I think, yeah.
Good enough.
Yeah. So anyway, so we go back, and at this point, we're in and out. It's all kind of trial and error. The way that I like to describe it to non-medical people is if you think of a bucket of water with a hole in the bottom, and you can either block the hole, which would maintain the level that's in there, or you keep replenishing what the liquid is. And in this case, you're replenishing it with what's natural to her body. Well, the doctor's protocol for this condition is to block the hole. Mm-hmm. Blocking the hole caused a whole nother set of issues where she bled out. So one day we come back from the hospital and her diaper's full of blood. I was like, what the heck? So we bring back to the ER, and they were like, yeah, we need to keep her on it. And so finally, nobody really would listen to me because I was just a hysterical first-time mom. But I graphed out her lab values over what we were doing and realized I don't think she needs to be on all this medication. I think we can supplement her with things that are natural. And no doctor wanted to do that because it wasn't part of their protocol. Mm-hmm. So we went from her pediatrician, who got us to Hopkins, and then Hopkins got us to NIH. And finally, the NIH doctor, who just became like a partner of ours, was like, yep, I think we can do it. Let's put her in here at NIH for a week and monitor just to make sure there's no problem. And we'll take her off everything and just give her supplementation. And it worked. And so I think one of the takeaways from that is, yeah, you might be emotional. Like I was crying all the time. You might be a first-time mom, or dad or caregiver of any kind, but it's okay to question politely and professionally. But they just thought that I was nuts. And I just kept pushing back and saying something's wrong, or I don't think we should do it this way. And ultimately, the NIH doctor basically wrote a book about Alex's condition because she was like the poster child for how to get off all the medication. And when we moved to New York City, her nephrologist asked me to start speaking with him. And Jessica came with me, I think, once. So I was speaking about being a first-time mom or a parent of a child with a rare condition. At one point, they told me you had a better chance of winning the lottery than of having a child with this condition. And it hasn't stopped her. I mean, you'll see in some of the pictures, I'm sure, she's 18, she's beautiful. She got a huge scholarship to her college of choice. And so, I mean, I'm a little biased, of course, but she manages it. So she manages it on her own. She, goes to see her nephrologist. She takes 10 pills in the morning, 10 pills at night, but it's all stuff that's natural to her body. So we're really proud of her. But yeah, I still can't believe I'm the person. I literally have seen both my kids in comas, and you're just kind of like, what happened to my life? But thankfully, they're both really doing well.
And I think, what part of what I'm hearing as the physician is, I think people get nervous to bring things to us. You're the one who's supposed to know everything. And we don't. I say that all the time. This is an art, not a science. We're still learning. And so, I think there's a way patients can bring ideas to you in a respectful way that if your doctor is not hearing, mm-hmm. maybe that's not the right doctor for you, right? Like, and just because I don't want to be unfair, because I love both your kids, I will tell you my early Alex's story, which I'm sure that she will really appreciate me telling. She was probably 2 years old, and I was sitting at your living room table, and I hear coming from, none of you remember this, coming from the bathroom, I hear someone going, assistance, assistance. And I said, is that Alex? And is she screaming assistance? She's 2. And you said, yes, we told her she can't scream help because we think something's really wrong. And I'm sure you felt that way because of what you've been through. So she's not allowed to scream help from the bathroom. So she needs us to help clean her. She has to yell something else. And so your 2-year-old came up with assistance. She sounded like she was like a 90-year-old lady. And it just represents Alex in like a million different ways, and your family in a million different ways, I feel like. Okay. So you mentioned, for both kids, I'm sure that you've realized how expensive the medical system is in this country. You've mentioned already the bed that Jake has, which I'm sure was not free of charge, and his wheelchair, which I'm sure are not free of charge. And you've mentioned to me privately, I think the shower like seat in the bathroom is not covered by insurance. So can you talk a little bit about, maneuvering the insurance system and how you have raised money in terms of supporting what I assume are going to be a very large series of medical bills for the very foreseeable long future?
Yep. So I will like to take a step back and just say, one of the reasons why my kids love Europe so much, and I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of socialized medicine, but I will say 6 weeks in the ICU, at least 6 major surgeries, including one by a world-renowned surgeon, 6 weeks. 4 of those medical-induced coma, and our bill was $60,000 before insurance.
My C-section bill was $100,000 for 3 days in the hospital and a C-section before insurance. I mean,
yeah. Amazing, right? So we, my brother and my really good friend were like, hey, you need to do a GoFundMe. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not comfortable with being on the receiving end. I've always been the one to do for others, to give others. I don't feel comfortable with it. So they humored me for a little bit. And then we started, once we got to Shepherd, and started understanding the amount of costs, both from a copay perspective for everything. And then the PT was telling me about the shower chair. So the shower chair is basically its own wheelchair. And so you use it to go to the bathroom and you use it in the shower. It's absolutely not covered under insurance, which blows my mind. And I was like, how is this not covered? And like, should we just take him in the back? Like, he can't move. Like, he can't use a shower bench. Like, he doesn't have a lot of trunk control, or didn't at that point. So I'm like, how do you not cover that? I guess we should just hose him out the back. And so that was really eye-opening to me. And that just kind of started. And then I found out that upper arm extremity prosthetics is not something that our country, for the right reasons, has a lot of experience with. Most of our amputees are lower limb amputees. So there's only a couple of doctors that handle it. And osseointegration is not FDA approved in the US. So his bionic arm would not be insurance covered. So that was also like, oh my God, okay, so we have to go, first of all, there's not many experts in the US, and the guy that is the expert is in Vienna, and it wouldn't be covered under insurance anyway. So we were like, okay, well, maybe we should go back to Vienna to have it done by this world-renowned surgeon. But it was funny because one of the therapists at the hospital was teasing us about how much is covered in the US. Like, and again, no offense to anybody in your audience, but penile implants are covered for insurance purposes, but a shower chair is not. And it's just crazy to me. So we were very thankful. We already have the shower chair. We just got him a standing frame. So Jake is able to transfer from his wheelchair to the stander. That's kind of like, if you just picture, sit down here, and then there's a riser. So it raises up the chair, and he's kind of not binded in, but yeah, there's like, he can be strapped in so he can get increased circulation and improvement to bone density. And so that required a ton of fighting with insurance, and still we're not even sure where that's going to end up. But all of those things, and just copays, the burns itself, like the wound care, which we're still dealing with 10 months later, they require a lot of expensive supplies. And again, we've been lucky. We have good jobs. We work really hard. We have a lot of friends and family that have been helping out. But like, Jake has decided he likes wheelchair rugby, and Shepherd does an amazing job with adaptive sports. So he wanted to join the Shepherd rugby team. And they're just such motivating and wonderful individuals. And, there's that movie Murder Ball on Netflix, and about rugby and what have you, mainly filmed at Shepherd. So the chair, though, if you picture it, he only has one arm. So
let's show a video. Let's show a video, and then you can tell us. So let's show the Jake in the. Let's show a video of Jake playing wheelchair rugby, which looks absolutely exhausting.
Push it, take it, push it. Saved it. Hey, buddy. Nice, bro, nice. Yep, that's it. All right, good.
So those chairs are designed for having two arms, of course, right? And then you have to throw the ball on top of that. And because he only has the one, he works twice as hard and gets half as far. And so he was getting frustrated. And so we started looking into a custom rugby wheelchair, which is definitely doable, but we didn't want to make that investment until we knew for sure that he wanted to do it. And so that's one of the current things is we're trying to see if we can manage the funds we have to do the surgery next summer, and then also make sure he has enough funds for his rugby chair and then whatever else comes up. So it hasn't been easy emotionally for me to accept help, but that has been one of the personal learnings through this. And especially when we had no choice in Vienna, like we were at the hospital from 2 to 7-ish. She technically supposed to be 3 to 6. We weren't going to be able to come home and make healthful meals, right? Like it was like, okay, just grab whatever you have. But the embassy really rallied and got us dinners and a meal train together. And we couldn't be more thankful.
So I'm going to be the reminder that those of us who love you want some way to help, right? So you're doing us a favor by allowing us to help. And I'm going to play the role of your brother now. I know your brother forced you to do a GoFundMe against your will. I'm going to put up the GoFundMe up here because to me, his story is just so inspiring that I think that people want to contribute where they can, right? I mean, watching him work so hard at that wheelchair, but because he likes sports and he wants to hang out with people. And, you can see everyone else moving so much faster with both arms, but he's going to find a way. And that's, the kid you have. So tell me, where is he now? What does he do? What is his day-to-day now?
So he gets up at 6, and my husband is wonderful because he doesn't like to sleep in and I do. So my husband does the first hour. So 6 to 7 does, breakfast and kind of bowel and bladder program. And then I take over at 7. He was very lucky that there's a private school here in Atlanta that's very accessible, and really were touched by his story. And they gave him a decent scholarship because we weren't planning on sending him to private school, right? We were coming back and going to Northern Virginia to a good public school system. So we were very lucky that they really wanted him to help teach their other students. Like I remember just being so thankful I'm going to get a little upset, but talking to the CFO about how touched we were. And he said to me, Alana, I have the chance to change one kid's life. Your son has the chance to change hundreds of kids' lives by teaching them and compassion. And anyway, so it was really amazing. So he's at school from 8:30 to 2:30-ish. And then depending on the day of the week, he still has outpatient physical therapy. He just wrapped outpatient occupational therapy. We're still dealing with some urology issues. So like today, he has a doctor's appointment. We're still dealing with the burns. So he has laser surgeries that are scheduled. I mean, it's still predominantly a lot of medical, but the best part is that the kids at the school have just been wonderful with him. And he's the first day of school, he came home and he said, Mom, kids are really nice. They don't have a good worldview of things, but they're nice. And he said, so I assessed who the popular kids were, and I just wheeled my chair over to their table at lunch because what are they going to do? Tell the cripple they can't sit there? And I was like, oh my God. That was exactly what he said. But then by the first weekend, the kids were coming to pick him up and take him out to the movies. And like I said earlier in the recording that, I was really nervous about that, because under the best of circumstances, I think I'd be worried about having my kid drive with other kids. But this is what he wanted to do. And he's since gone out, and these kids have been amazing with him.
On a totally selfish level, I'm going to ask a question that you may not know the answer to. So we may have to ask Jake sometime and get back to me. I have young kids, and it is not uncommon for my younger one in particular to say things like, why does that person have a cast on, or why is that person, she'll comment on appearance and things. And I'm wondering what Jake would say is the right thing for me to say to her. Should she go up to him and ask? Should I tell her, shh, don't ask things about that? What would his take be?
Jake owns it, right? So he could wear his prosthetic arm. He chooses not to. We just looked at his yearbook photo today, and he's wearing a t-shirt, and you can see there's no arm there. I don't think he gets particularly offended. I think it's tough in the beginning. When we flew in May, the stairs were hard. And my one girlfriend said, they're not staring because he's in a chair and he has no arm. They're staring because he's so handsome. And I was like, I'm not really entirely sure that that's the case. But I think he would be fine if a child came up to him. I think in the beginning, I said to him, do you want me to do a kind of presentation to the students? Because the school had us do a presentation to the teachers, which I thought was wonderful. And Shepherd sent a therapist to come with us to talk to the teachers, which also is just wonderful, and total plug for Shepherd and their No Obstacles program. But I think Jake owns it. And he was like, if people really care, they're going to ask me. And so I think he would be okay with that. But he thought it was good that I talked to the teachers, but he did not want me talking to the students. And he's like, if they want to know, they'll ask me.
It's amazing. How do you stay positive for him? There have to be some days that are just, I don't mean in the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, it sounds like it was all darkness, right? But now there's lightness in there, but there must be days that you just feel so weighted down. How do you stay positive for him?
So in the beginning, we did a mantra, right? And I'm not, kind of all into that, but I knew it was important. And so I made him say this. And now I just do this because he knows it's 3 things that we say. We say, we thank God you're alive. We thank God you have no brain damage. And one day, come hook or by crook, you will walk again, whether it's an exoskeleton or I have to get a spinal implant, battery pack into your piece of your spine that's not working. We will do whatever we need to make sure that you have as much function. And he'll say, Mom, I don't think I'm going to have a bad life. I just think I would have had a better life if this didn't happen. And thank God I was on my game that day, because I said, I totally disagree. I said, I know plenty of miserable, able-bodied people that don't have a fraction of your fortitude. And yeah, they might walk, but guess what? Like, they're just not happy people, or they don't know how to turn something bad into something positive. And that's kind of how we have to look at it. Like, I think being grateful for the support of loved family and friends has helped us stay positive. And I think his humor about it, like, he was just like, he has a lot of friends who are girls in Vienna, and they've been wonderful. And I guess he was doing a video call with some of his friends at school. And they were like, wow, this girl's really pretty. And Jake's like, hey, the handicap kid can get these cute girls. Like, what's wrong with you guys? And so he keeps me positive, right? I mean, look, it's really hard about the permanence of it, because without surgical intervention, he won't ever walk again. And even with it's questionable. But I think that doesn't mean he has to have a bad life. And I think the peer supporters at Shepherd have been wonderful about that, and really pushing that, most of them got married after their accidents. Or I had somebody say to me, I was looking at all of the awards on his wall, and he himself was in a wheelchair. And he said, Alana, those awards are not in spite of my accident. They're because of my accident. And I think one day we'll know we're finally on the other side of this, where I don't know if this will ever happen as a mom. I think it's different when you're a mom versus the patient. But the patient will say, you know what? I can't imagine my life any other way. Like, this accident has led me to this career path, or I met my wife at this that I would never have if I hadn't. Again, as a parent, I don't think you ever can say, oh yeah, I'm glad my son got hurt. But at the same time, if there's a point in his recovery where he can say, you know what, Mom, this accident led to all of these wonderful things, then I think that will be the ultimate state of like, okay, we've moved on. But I do think his attitude and the support of our friends and family and just being grateful, right? Like, thank God we have great medical care. Thank God the government has been so fantastic in helping us, navigate the medical system in Vienna or get us airlifted to come back here. Thank God Shepherd is here, and they have wonderful people, and they just love Jake, and they've asked him to come back to do tons of things. And we made the right decision to stay in Atlanta because he can go back for playing rugby twice a week. And yeah, so I think that's how. It's not easy, and I definitely have my group of friends that will keep me kind of grounded, and that was really what I call them, my peeps group. And they just you're one of them, and it's just that's really fortunate to have that.
How have you evolved during this over this 10 months? How has this changed you? It's obviously changed Jake, right? Like, we know
Yeah.
that, right? How has it changed you? Where do you stand now?
I think the biggest learning for me was patience. And again, just being a New Yorker, I've never been very patient. And I've never been good at accepting help. And I think those two things are probably the largest changes I've had to make. And, if I had enough years of therapy and emotional growth to do and all that, it probably would have been two things that I probably would have worked on, but I didn't really have the luxury of time. So I had to feel comfortable with both of those things, becoming more patient. And, it's also when we went to go visit our daughter family weekend, and I hear these kids at the playground, and the moms would be like, "Oh my God, don't get too close to the edge of the swing," and I'm like, I was that mom, right? And then look what happened, all these years later. And so, not suggesting people take unnecessary risks, but also just kind of, like, things are going to happen outside of your control, and you're just going to have to deal with it and be okay with it. And there are days that it's a lot easier said than done, but he makes it where, yeah, I have to be patient. It's patient on the day to day because everything just takes longer to do now, and patient on the recovery that will be years long. And also just kind of be okay if somebody says, "Hey, Alana, like, I want to send you whatever, or I want you to come out to dinner at my house because you shouldn't make dinner." Like, stupid things that I would never accept before. But you're right. One of the things that somebody told me is exactly what you said, Jess. Like, you're almost taking away our ability to, like, give, which is kind of rude because, we want to help. We want to give. You give. Like, by you saying, "No, I don't want to accept whatever the offer or item is," you're taking away from our ability to be happy by helping you. And that was a real mind shift for me.
What's next for Jake?
Driving.
Yeah.
So he's 15 and a half. And I think once he gets his bionic arm next summer, will be a game changer. Now, of course, there are plenty of paraplegics who have amputations that use various hand controls, but we kind of made the decision that we want to wait for him to get his arm so he doesn't have to learn two different techniques. But he's excited about that. And I mean, to see him get in and out of the car is just, it's so hard to even describe. Like, he wheels himself up to the passenger side. We have a slide board. He literally, with his one non-dominant arm, holds the little handle and pulls himself up and into the chair. And we have a Toyota RAV4. For the height was what they let you practice on all kinds of cars at Shepherd. And that was kind of the one that we thought would be the best for him. But he's excited to start practicing and get his permit. I think that'll make me a little even more nervous, but that'll be tomorrow's problem. And he wants to go to school. He really continues to talk about going to university in Europe. I don't know if that's really feasible. I'm saying, hey, Georgia has this Hope Scholarship where, if you maintain over a 3.5, you get free school. So we'll see what he does. But
talk a little bit about your bigger goal for him in terms of campaigns, because that's my goal for him. You joke about Nike and you joke about,
Oh, yeah. So one of the things, Jake really wants to help people, and motivational speaking, I think if you term it that, he's like not interested. I don't want to be a motivational speaker, but when it actually comes down to doing it, he really enjoys it. So I was thinking like it would be really cool if he could become like the next spokesman for the disability campaign of anything. We joke about Nike and Adidas because he likes expensive sneakers. He's also a cologne fanatic, and they always joked in the hospital because he has certain colognes for certain seasons. And so he was telling the nurses, well, you can smell this, but I can't wear it because it's a winter cologne and we're in spring. And so I just think if there was something that he likes a product, and that if he can kind of be the disability poster child for it, he is fairly charismatic. I like to think he is pretty attractive. And so I think he could do something like that. And also, I mean, that's for him to kind of help inspire others. For me as a parent, I really just want him to be financially taken care of for the rest of his life. I mean, he will work. He wants to work. There's no reason to think he can't. He already told me that one of his friends who works at the Braves Stadium said that there's a lot of jobs that for people in wheelchairs, I think because of the Shepherd connection down here. And he's like, Mom, do you mind driving me to the stadium if I got a job there? So he wants to work, but his care will be forever in some form or fashion. And so if he can be comfortable enough that if, Sean and I were hit by a bus tomorrow, I don't want him to ever feel that he's not getting the top notch of whatever he needs because of finances. And, we are government employees. So, if he can do something like that and benefit from a free pair of sneakers now and then it's a win-win is what I was telling him.
What's next for you?
I'm excited to see you in November when we come up. But I think, just kind of continuing our path of educating other people. I have spent a long period of time over the last 2 months speaking at Shepherd Center, talking to parents of newly injured patients. I'm still working, but I would like to try to do that as much as possible and just help it. Clearly, it's life altering. And as parents, you just want to be there for your kids. And I don't take that like every day that I'm here for both of my kids is a win for me. So I'd like to get back to, working kind of can come back a little bit on the priority scale. But as long as Jake needs me, like I'm going to have reduced schedules if Alex needs something. But I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with this. That is, to me, going to be the biggest thing out of this. And there's so many people that I've met at Shepherd where they followed a pursuit, like a medical profession, even though they were never involved in medicine or interested in math or science, or became speakers, or set up a foundation, or do all of these things that I think to help other people. And I think it'll be fun to see where both of my kids take it.
Lastly, any final, words of advice for families who have been through trauma? And I realize your trauma is particularly big and long lasting, but there's trauma in all sorts of ways that our families go through. Any advice to families overcoming such a hardship?
So last week, some of the moms from Shepherd got together for a little retreat. I went for just dinner one night, and they all are at least a year out from their child's accident. And they, as well as one other friend from the military, actually said to me the same thing. You have to take it in chunks, right? So when you're going through a trauma, especially in the early days, it's okay, this is the next hour target, or this is the 5-meter target. Like, because when it first happened, I'm like, oh my God, is he ever going to have children? Is he ever going to live on his own? And like my one friend was like, whoa, like, let's figure out if he's going to make it till tomorrow, right? But as a parent, it's all of that. And the women said it goes from being hour by hour to day by day to week by week. And you kind of your bandwidth kind of expands. And I didn't think that was possible, but it's true. And there's some days when I'm back to the hour by hour if something rears its head. But I honestly think that keeping that in mind and not letting yourself kind of be overwhelmed by the what ifs for any parent, right? Because I tell Alex a lot of times, you mentioned like she's 90 in the body of a child, but like don't borrow trouble. And like if it's not something you need to worry about right now, you have to stop worrying about it, because you need to direct your energies in a more positive way to things that really are the here and now. And I think that was really good advice. And also this group of women who I see, you know, their child had their progression because they're so far out from where we are, and they're different perspective than the peer supporters, right? Because they're parents. And so the parents, of course, very different perspective from the patient. And I don't think I realized that nuance too, because I always wanted to talk to the peer supporters and find out how they're doing. And I'm like, wait, they are here to talk to Jake. It's this group of parents that I can really learn from and lean on them. And if any of your followers and audience need to talk to someone, I'm happy to do that. Like that's what I've been doing at Shepherd, and it helps me. And if I can help other families through any of this, or even just the basic things about traveling, I'm happy to do it.
Well, thank you, Elena, from the bottom of my heart. You know, I love you. I love your family. I am so proud of how far you've come during this journey. I love following what Jake is doing. Thank you for taking the time to share it with us today. And I really look forward to seeing you in November.
It was truly an honor. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you all for tuning in to what was, to me, a very emotional, heartfelt podcast today. I hope everyone can take something away from it. At the end, we'll post Alana's contact information if anyone wants to reach out to her with any questions about her story, anything that can help you with your story. We'll post her GoFundMe page if anyone is interested in looking at that. And I'll post contact information for the podcast itself if any parents out there have any ideas of things that you want us to explore, any topics that you would be interested in. I'm always happy to talk about pretty much anything involving childhood. Have a great day, and thanks for tuning in.